This is historic Armenia. The land of Armenia is the cradle of the Armenian nation as well as one of the cradles of ancient civilization. The Armenian language belongs to the Indo-European linguistic family. The homeland of Proto-Indo-European speaking people is the Armenian highland. Scientists such as comparative linguist Vyacheslav Ivanov, Thomas Gomkrelidze, Aaron Dolgopolsky, Joseph Greenberg, Merit Rulin, and many others posited that the homeland of the Proto-Indo-European language was and is Armenian highland. Academicians from many countries used various scientific methods including multidisciplinary approaches like radiocarbon dating pioneered by Colin Renfrew and archaeogenetics by Luigi Cavalli Sforza within the broader comparative linguistics, archaeology, and genetics. The latest fundamental work by two renowned scholars from the University of Auckland, Russell D. Gray and Quinton D. Atkinson, showed that the homeland of the Proto-Indo-European language tree is in Armenian highland in eastern Anatolia. The scholars used the computational method and made an astounding matrix of 87 languages with about 2,450 lexical items, producing an estimated timeline for the initial Indo-European migrations from the homeland about 8 to 10,000 years ago. Figure 1 shows that the Armenian lineage is shown as distinct from Proto-Indo-European more than 7,000 years ago in its homeland, Armenian highland. For many decades, the Turkish propaganda has been falsifying Armenian history, just like the pan-Turkist ideologue and former Turkish Secret Service agent Esat Uras wrote in his book, The Armenians in History and the Armenian Question. Esat Uras stated,
I regard it as necessary and important above everything else to point out that Armenia cannot be anything other than simple memory based on geography, a region without political boundaries. Center for Strategic Research of the Turkish government's foreign ministry. It is very certain that the Armenians did not originate in Anatolia, nor did they live there for 3,000 to 4,000 years as claimed. They have put forward these ideas merely to support their claims that the Turks drove them out of a homeland in which they have lived for thousands of years, but they cannot stand up to the facts. Turkish Government Center for Strategic Research of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Armenians claim that they were the people of Urartu, which existed in eastern Anatolia starting about 3000 BC. This claim has no basis in fact. No form of the name Armenian is found in any inscription in Anatolia dating from that period, nor was there any similarity at all between the Armenian language and that of Urartu, the former being a Satem group of Indo-European languages, while the latter was similar to the Ural-Altaic languages. Nor were there any similarities between their cultures. There is therefore absolutely no evidence at all to support the claim that the people of Urartu were Armenian. The Turkish government funded and promoted false Armenology claims that not only Armenians are not native to their homeland, but also have never had a state of their own.
The most shocking thing is that the Armenian Studies chairs of the universities in the United States have also become the vehicles for promoting the Turkish version of Armenian history. Today, the more than 1 million Armenian Americans who are caught up in their everyday work cannot even imagine that the Armenian Studies chairs in the US are busy in decomposing the Armenian national identity and promoting the False Armenological School, which corrupts and distorts Armenian history and culture parallel to the Turkish design. Here are some of the prominent representatives of the False Armenological School in the universities of the United States. Nina Garsoian, Ronald Sunni, Robert Thompson, Richard Hovannisian, James Russell, Peter Cowie, Alina Iveson, Simon Payaslian. Throughout many decades, this false Armenological school pursued the following goals.
First, they proclaimed that the Armenian people are newcomers and colonists in historical Armenia. They proclaimed that the ancestors of Armenians arrived in Armenian highland in the 6th century BC and destroyed the Urartians. Second, they proclaimed that the three outstanding 5th century historians, Pavstos Buzand, Movses Khorenatsi, and Yerishe, are non-existent pseudo-historians, and their works are non-credible parahistoric texts. Third, they proclaim that the present Armenian people are a product of intermingling of different ethnic groups. Fourth, they proclaim that the territory of Karabakh-Artsakh historically belongs to Azerbaijan, since the Turkic Azeris are the direct descendants of the Caucasian Albanians.
These kinds of claims of the representatives of the false Armenological school have found wide support in the Turkish and Anglo-American political establishment because the United States and its ally Turkey continue to pursue their geopolitical and oil interests in the Caucasus. As the British historian Christopher J. Walker pointed out,
prejudice against Armenians in Western academic and even diplomatic circles was to some extent legitimized by the Cold War, when the attitude was to support Turkey whatever the cost. And despite the ending of the Cold War, a number of Western academics and ex-diplomats appear to remain quiet, unwilling to extend any understanding to the Armenian viewpoint, or to look seriously at its documentary basis. They continue to give almost uncritical support for the Turkish official version. As a result, much of what poses to be serious writing in academic journals about modern Armenian history is party-pre, selective and unreliable. It is Cold War NATO history, which has an interest to cover up and which does not seek to discover or explain the situation as it really was. Christopher Walker, Armenia and Karabakh, The Struggle for Unity, London 1991, page 3. And now let us see how the representatives of the false Armenological school are pursuing the NATO policy in the United States.
Ronald G Sunni, professor of social and political history at the University of Michigan. He was the first holder of the Alex Manukyan Chair in Modern Armenian History at the University of Michigan. According to Ronald Sunni, the national consciousness of Armenians about their identity is nothing but a collection of beliefs. Sunni writes that the primary purpose of his work is to decompose the Armenian national identity. According to Sunni, the ancestors of Armenians were invaders to Armenian highland who have migrated to Armenia in the 6th century BC. Ronald G Sunni, Looking Towards Ararat, Armenia in Modern History, 1993, page 7. Repeating the Turkish historians, Sunni writes, the modern Armenians are more the product of intermingling. Same book, same page. Repeating the Turkish historian, Sunni writes that the Armenian-Turkish conflict was provoked by the Armenian nationalists in order to overtake Turkish Anatolia, and the Turkish side simply reacted. Nation-making, nation-breaking, the end of the Ottoman Empire and the Armenian community, 1996, page 3. Repeating the Turkish historians, Sunni writes that the Turkic Azeris are the direct descendants of the Caucasian Albanians and that the territory of Karabakh-Artsakh historically belongs to them. Ronald G Sunni, Looking Towards Ararat, Armenia in Modern History, 1993, page 193. This falsifier of history obviously very well knows that the Caucasian Albanians have existed from the 1st to the 6th centuries on the left bank of the Cowe River, while the historic Armenian province of Artsakh of Greater Armenia was on the right banks of the Cowe River. He also very well knows that the ancestors of today's Azeri Turks were Turkic-speaking tribes that began their invasion of the Caucasus from their Altaic homeland in Central Asia only beginning in the 11th century. The name Azerbaijanis was given in 1922 by the Bolsheviks of Moscow to the Turkic people that before were known as the Tatars of Caucasus.
It is not a coincidence that the claims of Turkish government's Center of Strategic Research and the parts of the Ronald Sunni's book are very similar. It is also not a coincidence that the former head of the Turkish desk of the Central Intelligence Agency, a career spy and renowned Turkophile Paul Hens, made a generous admiration of Sunni's work and welcomed the publication of his book and the appraisal made in the Russian Review in April of 1995. When Armenian Studies chairs in the U.S. universities are led by the CIA and its career spies, it is quite obvious for us what kind of political goals are being pursued and what happens to the concept of academic integrity and honesty.
Next, one of these falsifiers is Robert Thompson, who is a former Galus Gulbenkian professor of Armenian Studies at Oxford University. This one is even afraid to show his face and place this dark image of himself on the university faculty website. He has purposefully distorted the translations of classical Armenian historians like Movses Khorenatsi, Ghazar Parpetsi, and Yegishe. Following the orders of his handlers, Robert Thompson executes a political agenda by stating that Movses Khorenatsi, Pavstos Buzand, and Yegishe are pseudo-historians who never lived in the 5th century. In 1986, during a conference on medieval Armenian studies that took place in Yerevan, Richard Hovannisian tried to defend Robert Thompson and calm down the Armenian academicians who stated their protest against this falsifier of history, Robert Thompson.
Richard Hovannisian. He is the Armenian Educational Foundation Chair in Modern Armenian History at UCLA. This corrupt historian, in his books, uses the Turkish terminology for Armenian highland and historic Armenia by calling it Eastern Anatolia. In 1997, the representatives of the False Armenological School in the U.S., headed by Richard Hovannisian, published a collective 2-volume grossly falsified Armenian Studies book entitled The Armenian People from Ancient to Modern Times for students in the U.S. We must also note here that his son, Rafi Hovannisian, who is a graduate of CIA affiliate Fletcher University School of Diplomacy, in June of 2008 made a speech at the Assembly of the Council of Europe in Strasbourg, demanding along with the Turkish and Azerbaijani delegations that the Council of Europe must terminate Republic of Armenia's voting right in the Assembly of the Council of Europe.
James R. Russell. He is the Master Professor of Armenian Studies at the Harvard University.
It's racist. It's a distortion. No, because I don't have any of those desires to distort your history or anything of the kind. That's nonsense. It's nonsense.
In the book The Armenian People from Ancient to Modern Times, the so-called professor of Armenology in fact shows himself a complete ignoramus who cannot even differentiate the nations and languages of the Hittites and Hattians. Even a 5th grade student knows that the fortress of Erebuni was erected by King Argishti I, yet this Harvard professor claims that the fortress of Erebuni was actually built by Argishti II. This falsifier calls the Armenian people colonists in their own homeland. In 2000, in the official journal of the Armenian National Academy of Sciences, Professor Armen Petrosyan exposed James Russell's work as complete fiction and utter ignorance of historical facts. Russell's work is full of gross mistakes and distortions that are designed to misinform and completely lead astray students of Armenian history and culture. Alina Iveson. This is a new face of the False Armenological School in the United States. She became an urologist by receiving her PhD from the University of California, Berkeley in 2006 under Marian H. Feldman. In the official site of the Berkeley, Feldman uses terms like ancient Turkey to describe Armenian highland. In fact, the term ancient Turkey does not exist in world historiography. This is complete ignorance or a deliberate distortion of truth based on a political agenda. Similar ignorance and perversion of facts was made by her apprentice Alina Iveson, who in 2008 presented a lecture entitled Erebuni, New Discoveries in the Capital of Argishti. When the audience asked her that the capital of Urartu wasn't Erebuni and was in fact always Tushpa, she replied,
"You know, that was my mistake. I keep calling Erebuni the capital and I keep being asked that question. It's because earlier on when I started studying Urartu, I read a number of things, older research which called Erebuni a capital."
What? Where did you read that? There's no such book anywhere in existence that calls Erebuni the capital of Urartu. Alina Iveson also claims that Urartu does not have any connection with the Armenians. If Urartu does not have any connection with the Armenian people, as Alina Iveson claims, then what is this ignorant professor doing in teaching Armenian studies at the University of Irvine?
Peter Cowie, Narekatsi Professor of Armenian Studies in UCLA. He received his PhD from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in 1983. Many of his students feel insulted by Peter Cowie as their national identity is being trivialized and ridiculed. The university faculty website shows that Peter Cowie's current research is focused on the history of Armenian theater and film, Armenian medieval history, and growth of modern Armenian nationalism. Who is this guy really working for? He's studying about Armenian theater and at the same time inquiring about Armenian nationalism?
Այնպես որ այդքան ուրեմն բեկչե մեղքանալ այդքան բեկչե ուրեմն փոշմանել որ անցյալը իր ասենք լրալայն ուրեմն ամբողջականությունը բան ողջունչացվել է.
Just like the other representatives of the False Armenological School, Peter Cowie claims that Armenians are newcomers to Armenian highland, whose culture begins only around 600 BC. This falsifier of Armenian history and culture claims that the works of the medieval 5th century Armenian historians are, quote, parahistorical texts. Peter Cowie, Yerishe Armenian War, page 345. For example, Peter Cowie does not want to accept the fact that Armenians during the medieval times had universities such as the renowned Gladzur University, which he calls, quote, monastic school. Peter Cowie, La Maison, pages 200 through 205. We can cite hundreds of such distortions and falsifications of Armenian history and culture by Peter Cowie. But let us concentrate on what he is teaching to his students at the university. We opened the textbook for Armenian C-153 course of Peter Cowie entitled Art, Politics, and Nationalism in Modern Armenian Literature. In this book, we are baffled to find out that nations and communities are only imaginary, and that national consciousness and national identity developed in modern times as a result of such imaginary thinkers. The book tries to teach that individual freedom stands above the nation or devotion to the motherland. What is this? Is this an ideological tutoring and political brainwashing, or is this a course on Armenian history and culture? In this textbook, you can find excerpts from Ronald G Sunni's infamous book. In fact, Peter Cowie's goal is an attempt to decompose the Armenian identity of Armenian students.
Simon Payaslian, a professor of modern Armenian history and literature at the Boston University. In 2007, he published his book, The History of Armenia. This book is written like a high school essay which supposedly includes the period of 3,000 years of Armenian history. The back of Payaslian's book includes a generous praise of his work by no other than the promoter of Turkish propaganda, Ronald Sunni. For Payaslian, the earliest record of the name Armenia is the Behistun inscription from the 6th century BC. In fact, So far, the earliest found record that mentions Armenia Armani is the inscription of Akkadian king Naram Sin made in the 23rd century BC. Payaslian also does not mention that the same Behistun inscription is trilingual and in fact mentions Armenia as a synonym for Urartu. Payaslian further distorts Armenian history by claiming that the Yervanduni royal dynasty is not Armenian. In the last part of this Falsifiers book entitled Independence, Modernization and Globalization, Payaslian writes that between 1992 to 1994, more than 700,000 Armenians migrated out of Armenia, including 61% women. Payaslian uses an unreliable foreign-funded source, Het Online, and states that a large percentage decided to remain in their new host countries to work in various jobs, including prostitution. Simon Payaslian, The History of Armenia, page 221. Payaslian makes a cheap attempt at degrading the honor of Armenian women by twisting words and talking about large percentage including prostitution. One wonders how it was possible for Payaslian to come up with any statistical percentage base. This really shows the true intent of Payaslian, who is simply fulfilling yet another political order through this book. Payaslian's handlers are preparing Simon Payaslian as the successor of Richard Hovannisian at UCLA. We have to realize that we're not dealing here with individual cases in the likes of Nina Garsoian, Ronald Sunni, Robert Thompson, Richard Hovannisian, Peter Cowie, Simon Payaslian, and others. In fact, this is an organized, planned, and systematically implemented anti-scholastic and anti-Armenian political agenda. The existence of the False Armenological School is based on the promotion of the NATO allies of the Anglo-American and Turkish political interests. It is not news to anyone that the Turkish government is lobbying the US congressmen and senators by spending millions of dollars. At the same time, they spend considerable sums of money in trying to promote anti-Armenian propaganda in American universities and academic publications. The Turkish government implements financial transactions through its Chase Manhattan branch in Istanbul. The headquarters of the Chase Manhattan Bank in New York has accounts of affiliate charitable organizations which receive Turkish transactions for following distribution. It is not a coincidence that representatives of the False Armenological School in March of 2002 in Michigan University organized a closed-doors conference on the Armenian genocide entitled Turkish-Armenian Dialogue, in which not coincidentally there were no scholars from Armenia present. The legendary Hrant Dink's newspaper Akos, in its March 22nd issue, exposed that the position of the Armenian participants was very appeasing to the Turkish side. The Armenian people have to understand that just because it seems that Richard Hovannisian, Ronald Sunni, and James Russell stand in defense of the recognition of the Armenian genocide does not mean that these falsifiers are in fact honest. The threat of recognizing the Armenian genocide has always been used in the United States as a political leverage and a type of blackmail on its own ally Turkey as part of its carrot and stick policy. In order to guarantee Turkish loyalty to American geopolitical interests, the US government keeps the issue of the Armenian genocide recognition in circulation, but never lets the issue find its justice. So, Richard Hovannisian, Ronald Sunni, and James Russell are permitted to make noise about the Armenian genocide. In 1997, the above-noted representatives of the False Armenological School agreed to collectively publish a 2-volume book entitled The Armenian People from Ancient to Modern Times, under the editorship of Richard Hovannisian. This book was designed as an Armenian Studies textbook for the colleges and universities in the United States. This anti-scholastic, full of distortions, anti-Armenian collegial textbook unmasked the False Armenological School and their destructive agenda. This book opens a new rift between the new generation of Armenians in Armenia and the diaspora. The guilt for this destructive and malicious endeavor falls not only upon the authors and the chief editor of the book, but also on some of the officials in the Armenian National Academy of Sciences. These officials, who in Soviet times were used to serving their Bolshevik masters in the Kremlin, have today found new paymasters in the United States. Because of financial expectations in forms of grants, they are bestowing medals, titles, and even honorary citizenship of Armenia to the representatives of the False Armenological School, who are truly sworn enemies of the Armenian people.
Armenian students of the world, unite. We are the vanguard of the Armenian nation. Demand from your academic consuls to remove from circulation the 2-volume book, The Armenian People from the Ancient to the Modern Times. Demand and write your academic consuls and expose the fact that your Armenian Studies professors are complete illiterates who cannot even write a simple 3-page school essay in Armenian. If the above two means are not effective, then collectively drop your Armenian Studies subjects in the universities, and in written form notify the university administration about the actual reason for your refusal to take the Armenian Studies courses. They think they can humiliate, mock and destroy our national identity. They think by brainwashing us they can implement a white genocide. They think they can destroy Armenia in a new way. They think they can cut us from our roots and erase our memory. They were mistaken before, and they are mistaken today. The Armenian people, from ancient to modern times, will live forever.